Joining us now is Derek Maltz, who spent 28 years in drug law enforcement, starting out on the streets of New York until finally spending almost a decade as head of special operations for the Drug Enforcement Administration. Derek, welcome.
Thank you, Cindy.
It's been 50 years now since the war on drugs, since the early 70s. What do you think has been the impact overall? I ask this because one characterization of what's gone on is that you can take down bad guys, but, chop off one head and another grows. And, natural selection, it might be a more ruthless head. So from where you sit and having been in that driver's seat for so long, what do you think the impact has been of the war on drugs?
Well, right now we're in historic level drug crisis. We've never seen this in the history of the country, but it's quite different now because we have synthetic drugs being made in labs in China, in Mexico, and other parts of the world, poisoning our population at record levels. But what I'd like to say is that, law enforcement's out there every day trying to keep America safe. And every time they make a seizure, like for an example of fentanyl or fentanyl pills, they're saving thousands of lives. Just as an example, like this vial here is only 30 grams of salt. If that was 30 grams of fentanyl, it could kill 15,000 Americans if it was pure fentanyl. So it's very, very addictive. The crisis is getting worse because the traffickers are getting more and more sophisticated. They're taking advantage of weaknesses around the globe, and they're using advanced technology, and they're doing a good job from their perspective. Obviously, from America's perspective, we're losing way too many lives.
The last guest I had in terms of drug busts, what he would say is that you take those drugs off the street, but that order is just going to get backfilled and that supply is still going to be there. It just means that particular batch didn't get into the hands of anyone, but the drug dealers, the gangs are ready to make the next supply. What do you say to that?
Well, the Mexican cartels run a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, and there are plenty of individuals working in these organizations, and they're in the business to maximize profits. They're going to take advantage of the addicted population, and they're now taking advantage as they've employed a strategic and marketing plan to go after our young, our 13-year-olds, our 15-year-olds that are sitting on their computers, and they're taking advantage, trying to get them addicted so they can make more and more funding. But a bigger problem is with the wide open border, they're taking advantage of the weak border security, and business is booming now. But I go back to, I used to work a lot of very pure heroin cases in the 90s and the 2000s, and every time we took a bag of heroin off the streets, you knew that you were saving a life. So from law enforcement's perspective, they're trying to save lives, they're trying to make seizures, they're trying to disrupt global networks like the Mexican cartels as an example, and they've done a tremendous job. Unfortunately, there's too many people addicted to drugs, and we can't get services in America. And there's no education. I mean, forget the education. I mean, the vast majority of the parents that I speak to, they're disgusted because no one's warning them about these new powerful synthetic drugs. Just look at Ohio State in May of this year. And these two young girls, 21 and 22, who died, and it was shockwaves throughout Ohio and the community and the country for that matter. They thought they were purchasing Adderall.
In your mind, what's the goal of an effective drug policy? And I'm assuming we're probably not going to see the cartels completely disappear.
You have to start with the kids, and you have to start with education, and it has to be done in elementary and middle schools, okay? We've neglected drug education in this country for many years. There's a 40% chance now if you take a pill that it's going to have a potentially lethal dose of fentanyl, which will kill you. Kids are actually supposed to learn from mistakes, not die from mistakes. But unfortunately, the drugs now are different than anything we've ever seen. So the education is critical. Where are the PSAs? We don't have any public service announcements on primetime TV. Where are the role models and professional athletes to speak out and get on social media, on Snapchat, where the kids are, and Instagram? That's not happening. You also have to hold Big Pharma, who is accountable for dumping 100 billion pills into America over a 9-year period. The Washington Post did a great job on that story. You got to hold the corporate leaders, responsible, not just fining, you have to put them in jail and send a powerful message. You also have to take the traffickers, like out in California recently, you had 2 Mexican traffickers stop with 150,000 fake pills, and they were released real soon thereafter. That's got to stop. But you have to get the people help. The mental illness is off the charts in America, but you have to go aggressively after the supply line. And you can't just sit back and rely on the Mexican government because they're corrupt at the highest levels. It's a very comprehensive, approach, but you have to get all the experts together. You have to have a task force of law enforcement and experts in the community, and you have to develop a plan and then hold people accountable for implementation. It's not just going to go away when you talk about it and you have old, archaic talking points.
Do you think drug users should be criminalized?
Well, look, we have to prioritize. Right now, we have to go after the people primarily that are killing our citizens at record levels. About 300 a day are dying. So the drug users, obviously, they have an addiction and they need help. Like right now, Cindy, I don't want to be political, but let's just call a spade a spade. We have the worst drug crisis in the history of America, and the White House says nothing. So until we get serious and have a sense of urgency, we just had a Baltimore Ravens NFL player. His diagnosis came out, cause of death was fentanyl with cocaine. Because these kids don't even know when they snort cocaine, the illicit drug supply is tainted. The education is horrible right now, and I just wish we'd get more aggressive education.
How dedicated do you think the Chinese Communist Party is to getting fentanyl in the country? That's where it's coming from. But is this a specific project of the CCP?
Well, in my opinion, yes. It's part of unrestricted warfare to destabilize and undermine America, which is a great adversary to them.
One argument that our last guest was talking about is that if you legalize and regulate even hard drugs, then that takes power out of the hands of the cartels. So maybe you reduce it by 40%, 60%, whatever it is, but that's a win, that's a gain. What's your thought? What are your thoughts on that?
Totally disagree, because the cartels are going to use the black market, which they're already doing throughout America. People aren't going to pay for marijuana, as an example, with these high taxes in these states. They're going to get it from the cartels, and that's just reality, okay? The other thing is, just look at the experiment in Oregon. How's that working for the Oregon taxpayers that actually voted to actually decriminalize certain drugs? The homeless are everywhere. It's unsafe. The crime is escalating. The addiction is going through the roof. So that's a failed experiment. It's not going to solve anything by encouraging drug use. Cindy, people are treating the current drug situation like the same old problem. No, we've never seen this ever, because it's not really drugs, it's poison. And if people start understanding that, maybe they'll have a different view on how we have to come up with solutions. I appreciate people are thinking of ideas. I certainly don't have all the answers. It's a very, very complicated problem set, but we have to be honest. We have to be honest, just like the parents out there say, well, it's never going to happen to my son or daughter because they're going to college and they're really good athletes and great students. No, every kid is vulnerable right now.
Derek Maltz, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your viewpoints.